You can start.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So, I actually didn't pick this language, this topic. So, Mr. Badi rearranged the topic, and I think it's an interesting one. Is PHP a dying language? I've always asked myself this question though. Why would anybody want to use PHP? So, in this session, we'll try to find out. I stand to be corrected on any error I make here. So, disclaimer. Let's begin. So we'll be looking at this content, the rise of PHP. Of course, we want to know how well PHP got, PHP frameworks and how PHP grew over time. That at apex point, because already we know it's coming down. So what was the apex point of it? When did that happen? How did PHP sneak into large organizations? And when it started declining, and other competitive language frameworks, we'll see a chart of how other language frameworks are also competing with PHP. And the most important question, will it keep declining? You know, most things like this are, most questions that we ask are mostly for career development and stuff like that. Because we are doing something now, you want to know whether in the next 20 years, that would still be relevant. I hope I'm right about that one. So with that, we'll also look at the predictions of the future. How long would PHP last? We'll be using several indices to find out how this will go. So let's start. Okay, sorry about that. I hope I'm clear enough. Okay, so first of all, let's begin with the rise of PHP, how it's all started. PHP is hypertext preprocessor. It was first created by Rasmus Leder, so we have that guy to thank for in 1993. But where PHP started becoming useful and really serious programming was actually with the Zen engine. That's around 2000 and something, 2001. Then it became our object-oriented programming language in 2004 with PHP Data Object PDO in PHP 5. And that was around 2004. So in 2014, there was a more formal specification or standardization of PHP. So the language became a more standard way of writing PHP. Okay, so also PHP 5.4 and 6 had Unicode attached to it, but it was that project was later abandoned. So yeah, we have certain instances where certain developments in PHP got thrown out of the window. Then PHP 7, we saw WordPress, which took over the internet by storm. That was with Zen Engine 3. That Zen Engine 3 had lots of improvements. Then Zen Engine 4 is one people should look at because they have just-in-time compilation and make PHP way faster. That was with PHP 8 too. Currently, we still have PHP 8 and there are several adjustments to it. So we have 8.6 and just like that. PHP frameworks later came into the whole scenario, but it's not that recent. You know, most persons would think PHP frameworks are kind of recent. No, virtually since the start of PHP itself, there have always been frameworks to assist people to code speedily. So, and you could use these frameworks to help you to set up initial things like things that are routine on PHP. For instance, let's say you want database connections and stuff like that. The framework just help you do that easily without you writing too much code. Okay, so let's look at this history here. Look at using this GitHub page that outlines the history from top to bottom. Like right, so pre-2000, we had this PHP library. Okay, this is the framework. So we had several frameworks all the way. Most of them, I don't think you'll be hearing any of them now, but back then, yeah, they were hits. So you see Cake PHP in 2005, quite old. Yi came around later on. We used Yi, that's 2008. We used Yi in Bingham. So you see Zen framework also there. Then Laravel came in 2011 and kind of stole the show. We'll talk about that later. Same with other listening. U2 later rose again with 2014, and CodeIgniter came in with 2019. We are seeing React PHP, which is kind of like an important part of PHP now, and it's also growing. We're also seeing Laravel. You see, Laravel kept growing from strength to strength. So we have Laravel 6. I've not really heard about the Zen framework and stuff like that. Okay. But we still use the Zen framework. Zen framework is still like the backbone of PHP. But I would not really say the Zen framework, more like the Zen engine is still the backbone of PHP. You see in most PHP, let's say, or in the website for PHP, what you're actually downloading is actually designed by the Zen company, but it's kind of open source now. So let's continue. So next aspect we'll be looking at is you can see that chart here. Okay, the framework chart and what's leading the market. It's operated PHP charts. So if you look at this, you see Laravel have a very large part of it. Takes a huge chunk of PHP framework market, see for 3.7%. So I think the reason for Laravel being because of the ease at which it's being designed to be very easy for newcomers. So most persons would like to go into Laravel than any other framework. We CodeIgniter, but Laravel is taking the and they also have a large community. So you see instances where people have already done a particular thing, and so it's easy for you to just keep having these examples. So that's why most persons are going into using Laravel. This is still the same different years at which each of these things came in. We have looked at that before. So let's look at the apex point. Where is the apex point of PHP? Where did it get so cool? Then if you look at 2013, we see that PHP had 240 million websites. That's like 39% of all websites back then. That was huge. 240 million websites at that time was really big. We had 2.1 million web servers as at that time. So PHP had like a large base at that time. Then 2021, PHP started 2021, that's last year, we see a decline. Okay, at first we were seeing something like it's 3.5% of websites using PHP at one way or the other. Okay, but as at 2021, we're seeing that number came down to some 9.1% of all websites. Now, does that show that PHP is declining somehow? But with the whole website, looking at every website. But if you look at the fact that websites are also increasing, and there are so many frameworks in the market, and that are non-PHP frameworks, you can see that PHP is still doing considerably well. So when it comes to large organizations using PHP, large organizations are the reason why most we say companies, most programming languages are being grown. They tend to put much money into it. For instance, they see C#, for instance, and it's being developed by Microsoft, and Microsoft keep pumping money into C#, like Xamarin, which I don't really know because they use it, but they keep pumping money into this these programming languages, and that helps to develop the programming language. So this website, like Facebook, for instance, which was a very heavy backer of PHP. Wikipedia uses PHP, Tumblr, Slack that we use uses PHP, MailChimp, Etsy, and of course, we know notoriously WordPress. So large organizations do use PHP, and that was the reason why PHP had this thing. But something happened along the way. What was that? So everybody was good with PHP until PHP started having they started noticing issues in PHP, because PHP is like because of a large, it's easy for people to just get into PHP and understand it. So we're saying that most persons said it was easy for people to hack PHP. So it started declining, and we started having Python coming into the same scenario. We won't really say that Python beats PHP in most, yes, in some ways it's kind of helping. And that's why most persons are kind of transitioning into it. Not really like transition, but most people are coming to Python, they're coming to web development. Some persons are like, can I use Python? And they're kind of going that way. So although PHP is just built for the web, Python is used for other things, but PHP is built for the web. So you can't really compare something that's built totally specifically for the web with something that's just multi-purpose. So with that in mind, you don't really say that Python is taking over PHP sense. So it doesn't really stop the decline, but it's just that it's competing. That's the idea. So it kept going down. Actually, PHP is now going down in its sense, according to the TIOB index. But I don't really believe in that TIOB index in a sense, because it's just going to look at certain aspects of why a language is going down. For instance, when there was a search on Stack Overflow, you have less PHP searches there on Stack Overflow, but yet on GitHub, you're seeing lots of PHP, decent PHP, lots of people are using PHP. That means that most persons are not really commenting on PHP on Stack Overflow, but yet they're writing PHP codes. So with that in mind, you can't really say that because of using Stack Overflow to judge, oh, people are not using PHP on Stack Overflow. That means that people are not using it on GitHub, or they're not really actively working on it. Just that they're quite silent about asking questions and stuff like that. Probably because there's already lots of answers, so people are they already have lots of things on PHP, lots of answers, and the framework isn't that too difficult like that. So most persons may not really be asking questions on Stack Overflow, but that doesn't mean that people are not writing on GitHub. So that was this thing. And TIOB may just be using Stack Overflow or maybe combining these things. But yet, even then, we could also see that TIOB index saw it moving from number 1 in 2004 when PHP was coming up, and currently it's number 9, and it's just moved from 7 to 9. So you see, it keeps dipping according to the TIOB index. So if we're going by that TIOB index, most persons will want to move away from PHP. But if you're looking at it that way, then you're saying that if you're looking at general web development, then maybe you could want to shift away from PHP. But when it comes to backend development, there's a different story entirely. But let's just look more on this decline. In 2014, something happened. Facebook, which was like the backer of PHP, like the top supporter, it moved away from PHP and opened and created different programming language, which is Hack. They are still using Hack till date, but that move kind of damaged PHP, because the reason why Facebook left was that PHP was having lots of holes. Lots of holes in the sense that it was easy for people to hack into for people to hack through PHP, and that was not a good thing for it. It was not also scalable to so they decided to use Hack instead. That kind of makes that 2014 was a big point for PHP, because besides seeing JavaScript, TypeScript, Python decided becoming bigger, so they're pushing into the market more than PHP was. So if you look at the competitive languages and frameworks, you see PHP is at number 4 there, but this is generally for frameworks, language frameworks. This is not just for web development alone. So if you are using this to go by it, if PHP is really what you want, PHP is not on the top rank So if you're just looking at general language and frameworks, you don't really call PHP in it. But just looking at, if you're looking at web development, of course, web development is growing. Web development is growing because most companies want to put their normal the software on the web. For instance, you can see Chrome, a browser. You have lots of websites that are normally apps that are now becoming Chrome apps and stuff like that. So web development is still as strong as ever, and it's also growing. And this also buttresses the point. See where Laravel is. There's no other web, but there's no other framework, programming framework for PHP above Laravel. So would you really say that PHP is going down? You see, when it comes to programming languages, you can't really tell. Probably a yes, probably no. It just depends on if there will be a breakthrough. That's just it. Programming language comes is increase or reduces based on breakthroughs. If most persons are working towards it, if more companies are putting their funds into it, maybe developing a particular programming language for a particular thing, then yes, it will move forward, it will boost. So, but does PHP have an issue? Yes, PHP had an issue. What about 2014 issue of PHP being porous, the security issue? That's what frameworks are for. So if you're thinking of solving the issue, there's already frameworks that have already solved that security issue of PHP. And with that, you still see the PHP keeps rising. We're going to look at that with these statistics here and see how we can predict the future based on what happened in the past. And we're also going to look at that growth of PHP backend framework. So let's look at this real quick. So it's loading. I think I have this one loaded already. Okay. This is it, but it's loading. Okay, so at 2012, you could see Ruby on Rails, right? So if you keep moving forward, you'll be seeing Laravel rising. Okay, Cake PHP is also up there, but you see Cake PHP moving over and Laravel taking its position. CodeIgniter was up there as at 2013. Well, over time, you see Laravel kept growing to the point it's you see Yi also coming up to, but Yi kept going back and forth based on probably the transition. Later on, they had to create Yi2, and then it had to move up again, and just like that. Then Laravel became number one at 2018, and till date, it still sits at number one. So if you look at this for backend frameworks, if you're just using that to judge backend, you can see that PHP is still number one on the list when it comes to number of websites that are using for backend programming. So yeah, so it's still wise to stick with PHP for anything having to do with the backend. Okay, so back to this. So let's just take a look. Let's take a swipe at Python. Why would anyone want to use Python? I remember I asked that question at the beginning. Why would anybody want to use Python instead of PHP? Because we're seeing the rise of Python coming up. And you can see from the concept of Python moving forward, you can understand why a programming language can unseat another one. Okay. Like for instance, right now, it's difficult to maintain PHP frame listen. It's also difficult for you to debug in PHP, but these things are easier with Python. And it's easy to maintain, it's easy to debug in Python. But when it comes to speed, PHP is 3 times faster than Python. So you see why most persons want to keep using PHP. Also, when it comes to database, how well it integrates with the database, Python is a no-go area, but yet PHP is like an all-round person encompassing so many databases, around 20 of them. And most persons already use the database, so why don't they just use PHP rather than move on to Python? But what happens in the future if Python is able to overcome all these challenges and it's able to maybe match up to PHP? Then we'll now see a decline in PHP as more persons want to use Python. Especially if, but what if too Python could, PHP could work on their difficulty to be maintained, and they could also work on the debugging. What if they could get faster debugging aspect of it? What would happen then? It means PHP will be more will still stick around and be more useful than Python. So you see, it just depends on something that has to change in a programming language for, or the way of the use of it, or the access to it, or maybe a framework that makes something better that will make a language to either rise or fall. So what's the summary of all of this? Yes, PHP is in the decline, but that doesn't really matter. The fact is that PHP will remain a key web language for many, many years to come, maybe 10. From the past, you see that PHP is over 20-something years old now. So it will keep growing, maybe till Web 3.0 come and sweep us all the way, probably, but we don't know yet. Maybe PHP will even form a core part of Web 3.0. We don't really know. So, but the entire thing is that when it comes to a language going down or going up, it all depends on the user community, how big the ecosystem is, if there's enough documentation and learning resources for it, what problems is that language well suited for? Is there problems in the programming language too, like how PHP started deeping? What if those problems are corrected? What will happen? The language will start going up again, the usage will start going up again. The frameworks, yes, the frameworks have a lot to play, a lot of parts to play, because if it's easier to code and you can reuse the code over and over using MVC and stuff like that, it just makes sense for you. And that language will just keep rising. But in a situation where all of these things are neglected, not enough backing by the user community or a large organization, we start seeing the language dropping. So before we this thing, let's see how we can edit this. For a framework, with any framework, how would you judge a framework? So that's my question to everybody out there. I think there are 18 persons in the list. So I would like I would like an interaction. How do you judge a language or a programming language? How do you judge it based on what we have discussed so far? If the language is actually dying, because if we use we could use this framework, we could create a framework where we can judge virtually any language to know if that language is dying or the language is going up. So I would like to hear comments. Then we can get to questions. Hello? Okay, I think with Michael, Alex is raising his hand, please.
Okay, based on its use.
Yes. Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can
I
hear
said
you.
we can judge based on the language use.
The language issues.
Use.
Okay, the language use. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, who else? Is there any other person?
Okay. Just like Mr. Michael said, one way to judge how good a language is how many, just like you highlighted, how many websites are making use of it, how many web servers are using the framework, and one thing that has been highlighted as well is speed, the speed of the language, how how the response is also a way to judge as well. But one large factor that can be used is its rate of usage, like how many people are actually making use of it.
All right, thank you. So we have usage and we have speed of the language, like you said. Yeah, speed is very important. Just imagine in having maybe the virtual reality and stuff like that. You need extreme speed in order for you to transform for this thing. For instance, we are having 5G coming in, and imagine a situation where your website does not is slower than the internet speed. Definitely there are problems with that. Thank you. Who else?
Hey, good morning, sir. I think I have
Yes, sir.
a suggestion. I think I have a friend like who is a programmer and all that, and he used to talk about debugging and all that. So I would say you can judge a framework by at the rate at which you can debug. Most of them say it takes hours to debug and all that. So if you can debug in a framework faster than some other framework, I think it's better like that.
All right, thank you very much. That's true. Debugging is a very serious issue. I remember when I had to debug a particular this I suffered for a long time. It's Mr. Dinka that helped me out. I think it also involves lots of experience. If you have a lot of people with lots of experience, it will be easier um for debugging. But yeah, the PHP framework, it was quite difficult debugging. It don't even show you what's wrong. You'll be seeing something else entirely, but it's something else that's the problem. And if you don't really know what that thing is, you end up not knowing what to do entirely. But I think with Python has easy way of it, but you really see the error and you know, okay, where the error is really coming from. So with PHP, it may pointing this way, but actually this stuff that's wrong. So yeah, debugging. So we have free speed debugging. Anybody else? Before
If I can mention another, the number of databases it's able to integrate to, such as maybe say MySQL, Postgres, Oracle. Just like PHP has more. You mentioned 100 plus. So I can't remember the specific amount, number of databases, but
20, about 20.
20.
Yes.
Okay, that means I got that wrong then. So 20. So that's one of the ways you can rate a dying programming language and one which is in use.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, databases are very important. Every website needs a database. So, all right, before we conclude, is there anybody else, and then we can end here, then you can ask questions if there are questions. Okay. So I think there's no one else that wants to go. So yeah, that's where we end today. Thank you very much. What about questions before we, any questions?
Yeah, I have a question, sir.
Yes, go ahead.
As somebody who is not a programmer like that, and I want to dive into programming, so you mentioned like PHP is kind of going down. So with this kind of going down thing, is it safe to say I can learn other framework instead of going for PHP and all that? So though you mentioned some advantages about PHP too, but what will you suggest I go for? Which other framework apart, if not PHP, which one do you suggest? Thank you.
I think when it comes to choosing a choice of programming language, it's more about what you want to do with the code and how the future of that particular aspect of whatever you want to do. Like web development, one thing, we don't know what will happen to web development in the future. It's possible that web development may become purely into virtual reality. Maybe we just all we need to do to browse something is maybe plugging something to our eyes and a virtual reality headset, and then we're somewhere and browsing. And that may then mean that virtual reality may be the future and web development will be gone. We don't really know. Also, maybe it's more of You know, remember there was a time apps were booming, that virtually everything is an app. This is an app. Everybody wanted to be on an app. Later, the web became stronger such that most persons now are now into web apps rather than just a normal native Android or iOS app. Nobody wants to be stuck with one this and then you now have to create for iOS separately, create for this separately. Apps just have their own reason for maybe existing. And then websites also have their own reason for existing too. And most persons are now having web apps rather than normal applications. So you see, the future has swapped from, we at first started with webs, then later it went into app. Now everybody's going back to web. We don't really know what the future may be. So you have to look into predictions of what software development may be about and what you may want to go into. Also, it's also about passion. Many people think game development is the future. Virtual reality will definitely involve 3D game development and stuff like that. So you may want to look into C# and stuff. But generally, what we're looking at is if you know one programming language, it's easier to transit to another. As long as it's within that frame of, okay, this is a object-oriented programming language. If you are good with one object-oriented programming, I think you can easily move across other programming language. But I don't really think that's a good thing in a sense, because it can sometimes make you be jumping from one programming language to another without really having something strong. So you stick with one. And then if you notice that there's a decline in it, then because you already know object-oriented programming language, you can easily jump to another programming language. If you look at those persons from the 1980s, most of them still stuck around the 2000s and they were still strong in what they were doing. They had to move maybe from the old programming language to another. It's not like they stopped programming. This when you're in this business, I don't think there's a time we ever sit down and stop learning and think that, okay, that's where it ends. I think it's just a journey. Just keep going, keep jumping ship and getting to where you're going.
All right, thank you for that much.
I have a question.
Does anybody have any addition to that? I may not be the best person or to answer that question. I think I may not be the best to answer the question. So somebody else may answer the question too here. If you think I answered it wrongly.
I have a question actually.
Okay, please.
Yeah. So I saw that you were able to give some form of comparison a lot with Python. I saw that you were able to do a lot of comparison with Python, PHP against Python. But I saw that, I don't know, I have not done my research on what I'm about to say. Well, it's looking as if there is, we have more advent of
Hello? It's my network. Hello?
No, it's not your network.
Okay.
yeah. Let's
Okay,
say
sorry. I don't know if you could go back. We lost you for after you said
can you hear me now?
yes, I can hear you now. You said after you said
Okay,
something
yeah.
about
Yeah.
the advent of Icon, that's where we stopped hearing.
Yeah, what I was saying is we saw that is looking as if we have more Node.js developers, let's say in Nigeria, and maybe probably we have more Nigerian website. I'm not sure about that that are running on that framework. So what can you say about that? What comparison can we have
With
between
Node.js?
Python, PHP and JavaScript frameworks?
Okay, I think PHP is still very it's quite versatile, but I think JavaScript has its own domain where it is really good. But when it comes to database, I think PHP has it all. Like PHP is like the top guy when it comes to database. So if your project is more about database and how to store things, like how Facebook is, something like that. Like look at Slack, for instance. Slack decided to use PHP because of how what it needs. It needs lots of database management and stuff like that. So I think with that, if your app or your website has a lot to do with database, you more likely want to use PHP because it's faster and it helps and it's easier to integrate, not using Node.js per se. I think Node.js may also have its strengths, maybe in applications, how well it works with applications and stuff like that. I think it's just based on what's the usage. I think it's based on the usage that it decide to use more of that. But I may be wrong.
All right, thank you. Thank you. So do you have any other question for today? We have less than 1 minute to go. So thank you very much, Ariva.
Thank you, sir.
It's great. You've done a lot of research, and it's well done. So if we don't have another question in the channel, you can just go there, check for your schedule, and if it happens that you can't find your name there, you can reach out to me. I'm going to add you on the schedule. So thank you very much for joining us today. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you.